Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Wednesday, November 20th. I'm Justin Sacher in for Elizabeth Arkalian. Every athlete sets their eyes on a big prize. Runners might dream of competing in world marathons. Swimmers might want to make it to the Olympics. And lumberjacks are no different.
It's hard to even put it into words. It's kind of like the dream come true, the pinnacle of the Stihl Timbersports, the world championship.
We speak with a Valley man who is now a champion in the world of Timbersports. But first, today's headlines. Much of Northern California and the Pacific Northwest is bracing for what's being called a bomb cyclone. That's a storm that will produce heavy rain and winds. The impact will last into the week ahead, but the most intense rain will arrive in our area Friday night and Saturday. Power outages and flash floods are predicted. This will be the first strong atmospheric river of the rainy season. California lawmakers passed significant new rules for managing groundwater a decade ago during a major drought. Cap Radio's Megan Myskovsky reports that 10 years later, state leaders are evaluating its impact.
The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, gave local governments requirements and a new structure to protect groundwater levels. Groundwater was largely unregulated by the state before 2014, and overpumping led to depletion in some areas. California Natural Resources Secretary Wade Crawford says SGMA has been successful and has impacts beyond the environment.
Our economy, of course, whether you're in the Central Valley or the Central Coast, really most parts of the state, is going to rely on maximizing the durability of our groundwater supply.
The nonpartisan Public Policy Institute of California reported earlier this year that local agencies are mapping out where wells are most likely to go dry and limiting new drilling in risky areas. The report also found that SGMA helped speed up incentives to reduce groundwater use and recharge depleted basins in wet years. State leaders say as they've seen SGMA in action, they've also noticed some weak points. Former State Assembly member Roger Dickinson authored one of the bills that makes up SGMA.
I'm not sure we gave the emphasis to small farmers that we should have, or the emphasis to disadvantaged communities' access to clean and safe drinking water that we should have.
In Sacramento, I'm Megan Myskovsky.
Fewer Californians turned out to vote this past election day than in 2020. Policy Director Eric Muggy wrote about it for the nonpartisan Public Policy Institute of California.
This election didn't seem to engage voters in the same way as the one 4 years ago.
The state is still counting ballots, but Muggy says that current estimates for the number of ballots left from the Secretary of State's office show a probable 6 to 11% decline. That's higher than the current national estimate, which also dropped. 2020 saw record high levels of voter participation, even in California, which isn't competitive in the presidential race. Muggy says that might have been situational. People were still under pandemic restrictions.
Voters just didn't have a lot of normal distractions.
He says more data is needed to know why fewer Californians and Americans turned out this election. A rare frog species commonly found in the Sierra Nevada is making a comeback from near extinction. The Sierra Nevada yellow-legged frogs were listed as endangered a decade ago due to a fungal disease outbreak. But recently, scientists found some frogs were resistant to the fungus, and they started reintroducing those into other nearby lakes. Now, nearly 100 adult frogs and 1,000 tadpoles are self-sustaining. Scientists are hoping the population will continue to grow.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from Fresno Mazda, part of the Prieto Automotive family, with special holiday financing deals on select models through the end of the year at the new showroom on Blackstone and Barstow. Information at myfresnomazda.com.
And now to our main story. Nate Hodges lives a simple life in the Madera County mountains. He's also a business owner, but now there's something that sets him apart from his neighbors.
And now, at the first place, winner and world champion of the gold medal Stihl Timbersports World Championships 2024, Nate Hodges!
That sound from earlier this month when Hodges was awarded the Stihl Timbersports 2024 Individual World Championship Trophy. He stood in front of 5,000 cheering spectators who attended the competition in France. Stihl, that's S-T-I-H-L, is a German power tool manufacturer most known for its chainsaws. We wanted to learn more about the world of timber sports and what it means to be a champion in this field of woodcutting. KVPR's Kerry Klein recently spoke with Hodges. He shared the feeling of winning on the world stage.
It's hard to even put it into words. It's kind of like the dream come true, the pinnacle of the Stihl Timbersports, the world championship.
So I'm curious about how one gets into professional timber sports. Can you first just explain what those are, but also what made you first aware of the sport and how did you develop these skills?
So I live in North Fork, grew up here all my life, and for years they had the Loggers Jamboree here in North Fork. Well, once I was old enough to do it, I didn't really have this plan, but a little light bulb went off when I was about 18, and I said, I love doing this. I love splitting wood, chopping wood. I like cutting firewood with my parents. I even like taking my axe and throwing it at old dead trees. I was that mountain kid, so I'm like, why don't I enter this competition? And that's exactly what I did. And my very first year entering it, I was lucky enough to win the axe throw. Like, it was pretty neat. So that was kind of like my gateway into the sport. And from there, I started going to little shows around California. There's shows all over the country and all over the world, as we know. But like at that point, I had no idea what was going on. I started traveling a little bit outside of Norfolk and kept winning small shows. And a lot of people are like, Nate, you have a lot of ability in this sport. There's professional level that you could go even higher. And at that point in time, being 20, 21, I just didn't have the funds to travel and buy the gear. The equipment's really expensive. So I never did it. I never pursued going professional until I was about 7 years ago, about 34, 33 years old. I seen it on TV and I go, you know what? I've been missing out. I've got to get involved with this professional Stihl Timbersports. And I went full force, traveled to Australia. My first year, went to the biggest wood chopping event in Australia, bought axes, crosscut saws, begged, borrowed, and pleaded, tried to get a hot saw. You got to have all this equipment for this sport. It's a weird niche deal too. You don't just go to the hardware store and buy it. So anyhow, that's how I got into it.
Well, so for this world championship, you competed against 11 other competitors from around the world in France.
Yep.
And to win, you participated in 6 different competitions. Can you explain what those categories are and what they look like?
The first event is underhand chop, and a lot of people will just call that like the horizontal chop. So the log is horizontal, we stand on top of it, and at go we chop it in half as quickly as possible. Then you've got Stihl, the manufacturer of Stihl chainsaws that puts this entire show on. They provide a Stihl stock saw, which is a saw that anybody can go down to the hardware store and buy from like an Ace Hardware. But it's a very competitive event. So because it's so even, right? Like, it doesn't matter how strong you are or what you do. Everybody is running the same saw on the same size wood, trying to make 2 cuts with their hands on the wood, trying to go as fast as they can. So it looks probably like the easier event to the spectators at home that may watch it, but it's actually the tightest event of all 6. You'll see the spread is all within 1 second or less. So that's a competitive one. That's stock saw. Then the next event moves on to the standing block chop, which is and we refer to the block as the piece of wood. So the block of wood is standing vertically in the stand. And once again, this is imitating kind of like the felling of a tree, how it was done years ago with an axe. So then the 4 bottom athletes are now eliminated and you move into the next events. So you've got 8 competitors moving into the springboard chop and the single buck. Once again, this is a manual saw. They call it the misery whip, or there's a few different names for it because it's just a very physically demanding, hard task to go out and cut an 18-inch log by hand with a handsaw. And then move on to the springboard chop. You've got 2 boards with metal clips on them, and you cut the little tiny notches that we call pockets into the tree. And then you end up chopping kind of similar to the standing block. You chop a vertical block that has been mounted to the top of this springboard tree. Then you get to the last event, the grand finale, which is the hot saw. This, unlike the stock saw, it's nowhere near a stock saw. We've got basically a dragster dirt bike engine that's been modified and crafted into this chainsaw that has 10 times the power of the biggest store-bought chainsaw. So that's a wild one because, you've got to cold start it. You've got to make 3 cuts within 6 inches. They've got to be complete disc. So there's a lot of pressure in that event.
And so you've got to have demonstrable skills with an axe, with saws, with a modified chainsaw, with really a whole bunch of different tools.
Yep. And that's the name of the game, with this is, like Australia is actually, they're very good wood choppers. If you look at the results, they beat me in the chops. But we as Americans, for whatever reason, we've spent a lot more time with maybe the hot saws and the stock saws and the single buck saws. So it levels out the playing field, and you've just got to be good in all of them if you want to be on top. And that's something I work at very, very hard.
So if someone finds this sport intriguing, how would you recommend that they get started?
Yeah, that's a question that gets asked a lot, and it's pretty difficult only because I did it, and I know what it takes. And I'll tell you what, if you're dedicated and you really want to do it, then, it takes some money and it takes some getting a hold of guys like me in the sport. We're pretty generous with opening up to help people, We love to see the sport grow. We love to see newcomers. So, you just reach out to the top level competitors and we can answer a lot of questions because it is very hard to get going. You don't go to Big Five and buy an axe or a single buck saw. It just doesn't work that way. You got to special order them from, New Zealand or Australia. And it's quite the task to get started in this sport. But I've helped countless people and collegiate athletes just to keep the sport going. So there's a lot of help out there if you reach out.
That was KVPR's Kerry Klein speaking with Nate Hodges. He's a resident of North Fork. Earlier this month, Hodges became the Stihl Timbersports 2024 Individual World Champion. And that does it for today's show. If you like what you've been hearing, help support the show by leaving a 5-star rating in your podcast app. Even better, share the podcast with a friend. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Justin Sacher. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
No matter what happens in Washington, the NPR Politics Podcast is here for you. For the latest news, insights, and analysis from the election and beyond, listen to the NPR Politics Podcast.